Good evening, Northern Colorado. This is Whiskey Zero Delta Delta Zulu. My name is Dave, and I am Net Control for tonight's Northern Colorado Amateur Radio Club TechNet. Tonight we're discussing multi-band antennas, which is the best multi-band antenna, dual band, tri-band, dipole versus colinear, inverted V versus Windom, HOA antennas, mobile HF, VHF, and UHF. We'll start by taking a few check-ins. If anybody would like to check in, please call.
Whiskey 2, Mike, India, Charlie, Mark in Loveland.
0 and what's the matter with me? November 0, November Yankee, Bart Evans. I need a 30-second break to change radios to in the house in 0 NYY.
KE0, Echo Lima Kilo, Tom in Loveland.
AE0BQ, Alpha Echo 0, Bravo, Quebec, Daryl in Longmont.
KC0, ZIE, Kilo Charlie 0, Zulu India Echo.
The net would like to recognize Whiskey 2 Mike India Charlie Mark, November 0 November Yankee Bart, Kilo Echo 0 Echo Lima Kilo Tom, AE0BQ Daryl, and KC0 ZIE Darren. Any other check-ins for the Monday TechNet, please call.
Kilo 9er Bravo Golf Uniform, Turn Mobile.
This is Kilo Echo 0, Oscar X-Ray Victor Scott in Fort Collins.
Kilo Echo 0, Papa Uniform Whiskey, Greg in Loveland.
Got Kilo Delta 0, Kilo Zulu Bravo, Jack in Greeley.
The net would like to recognize K9BGU Taryn, KE0XV Scott, KE0PUW Greg, and KD0KZB Jack. Any other check-ins for the Monday TechNet, please call.
Kilo 0 Delta Bravo Echo Debbie in Fort Collins.
Kilo Delta 0, Tango Yankee Uniform, Joe in Loveland.
The net would like to recognize K0DBE and KD0TYU, Joe and Debbie. Before we get going on the topic of the net tonight, the multi-band antennas, does anybody have any questions for the net? They don't have to be about the topic. They can be any general questions for our experts we have tonight. Anybody have any questions? Please call. Hearing none, we will jump right into the topic. Today we are discussing multi-band antennas, and it seems like we have quite a plethora of multiband antennas. It's kind of rare to see any the antennas that only handle one band, unless it's perhaps a 220 antenna. So let's hear from you guys. What is your multiband antennas? Which multiband antennas do you use and why? Anybody want to take that? Please call.
Delta Zero Tango Yankee Uniform.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Dave, I'm curious what you're talking about. You talking UHF, VHF, HF, or what?
We are discussing it all. UHF, VHF, dual band, tri-band, dipole versus colinear, inverted V versus Windom, HOA antennas, mobile HF, VHF, and UHF.
Okay, well, I'll just, as most people know, I guess we've got some new people on here that don't know, but I'm a big fan of the hex beam or spider beam, whichever you want to call it. It's a multiband antenna, and this one will handle 20 through 60. It's got a gain, and that's unusual for something that's this. And again, it's a low profile, therefore I cannot talk to Colorado, but I can talk all over it. I really do like it. Wind loading is absolutely zero, pretty much. We've had some pretty big winds over here, and I really think it's a heck of a good antenna and very simple to put together if you get the right one. So with that, I'll take it back to you.
Oh, the hex beam. You know, I actually haven't heard you talk much about that one at all, Joe. And is that directional?
One thing I like about it, it's kind of expensive to get into it because by the time you actually put the antenna's not that bad. You can pay anywhere from $200 to $600 for one, depending where you get it. But you got to put it on a pretty good pole. You got to basically have a rotor to make it go. It's a dynamite antenna. I'll tell you what. I've worked. It's kind of a beam, yet it's a multi-facet beam. It's got a gain of about anywhere from 5 to 6 dB. So it definitely does do its job. I really do like it.
Ah, very cool. And how high do you have that hex beam up?
Best guess, it's around 25 to 30 feet. It's not a major, it's on a pole up here. It's one nice thing about it is you can see it. If you paint it blue, it kind of blends in. But it's probably not something for an HOA. And the one drawback from it, it is huge. It's 21 feet wide, so it's not like you're putting up a vertical, which is just up there and you guide and the rest of that stuff. But this antenna is not guide at all, although we've got it pretty well. I think the last support is within about, let's say 6 foot of the thing. But it doesn't weigh anything. It weighs like 21 pounds, so it's a very, very lightweight. It's all made out of PVC and wire. There's really not much to it.
And did you buy that commercially, or did you make that yourself?
No, you can make them themselves, but what I liked about this is James found a guy at a show that was selling them out of Florida, and I bought that. This one's probably 3-4 years old, if that, maybe even longer. All the wire was cut to size. It took me 30 minutes to put the thing together. I mean, it's the simplest antenna. I put the rest of these HF, these are not HF antennas, but these UHF VHF actually took longer than the X-beam did. You just set it on a table and you put the poles in there. Everything is cut to length. You don't have to fool with anything. You plug it in. I put an S-meter on the thing, and I got a pretty good S-meter for the thing, and dead on. I mean, worst case was 1.5. That's hard to tune out. So, I mean, it's definitely dead on.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, I have been using a DXCC fan dipole, which is good for 80 through 10. But it does have a couple of coils on the 80 meter that make the 80 meter very, very narrow. 40 meter, I have quite a good, pretty much the entire 40 meter band I can get to. 20 meter, I can get to 95% of it. And then it goes down from there. But how does that do on the bandwidth? Do you get good SWR on the entire band, or does it have gaps?
I have to admit, knock on wood, I definitely have no problems any part of the band, and I am an extra, so I work all the bands. Even up on 80, I'm sorry, that's the vertical. But on 20 meters, it's dead on. I've worked a little on 6 with it, but not very much because it's more, like I said, it's a low-profile antenna. So the people that are talking 6 meters are usually local people that have tried to talk to. I think Terry and I have tried, but it's dead on. It doesn't make a difference what part of the band. In worst case, like I say, is 1.5 because I sweep the band with this thing I've got, and it's dead on. I mean, like I say, 1.5. I hit the tuner just because I have it, but it normally just kind of looks at me and says, it's okay.
Yeah, that's a very interesting antenna. I may have to check one of those out. What'd you say you picked that up for?
Well, Dave, it's went up in price. I think I paid like $460 something for the thing, and the guy is really good. This one was bought out of Florida, and I can send anybody the information on it. I just happen to have it, and I think it's went up in price. I do recommend, if you're going to buy this thing, though, ice cords are probably what you want to do, and what they actually are is when you tie your wires up, of course, you actually bend these PVC poles up to, somewhere on the end to be a vertical type situation or horizontal type situation. And they bend up. Well, there's cords that go to them, and then there's such a thing. I'm going to let this drop for a minute. And then there's such a thing as ice cords, and what that is basically it's for the wire. If it ices up and things like that, these extra ice cords actually hold it solid. There's one thing I did change on that. What they do is they have S-hooks that go into the pipe, into the PVC pipe, and then it pulls to the center where they have an eye bolt in the center. What I did was I actually took some hose clamps, small hose clamps, or we call them gasoline clamps back in the day. Okay, and I clamped those on there so they wouldn't come off. And what that helped me for was the wind and a snow load, and I have had no trouble with it. Like I said, I've been up there 4 or 5 years and absolutely zero problems with it.
Oh, very cool. Anybody else have any questions about the hex beam for Joe? He seems like he's had quite a bit of fun with that antenna there. Hearing none, I apologize about the bit of intermodulation that we're getting on the stream here, or on the repeater here. We're working to resolve that. Anybody else have a multiband antenna that they would like to tell us about? Please call.
AE0BQ.
Yeah, Daryl, go ahead.
Right. My first antenna, Newham, April this year. First antenna recommended was get yourself an Arrow J pole so you can hit the repeaters. And so I got an Arrow J pole. I guess they're made up in Oklahoma or Wyoming somewhere, somebody in their garage or something. But it works pretty well. A bit of a loss on the UHF side. 2 meters works great. There's the profile looks like there's a dip in the towards the end of the VHF, and then it rises through the UHF range. So and then all the Elmers that I have, I have 3 or 4 different Elmers that are helping me, all said, yeah, you're going to work HF, go ahead and get yourself a G5 RV and a tuner. Go ahead, just do that. And works out well for me because in my yard is about 80 feet wide, and I already have the J-pole up on a 40-foot mast. It's about 36, 38 feet in the air at the tip, so I can take the G5 RV and hang it inverted V style, and it'll just meet the edges of my property, I think. I'm not sure what the orientation is going to be. I hope it's roughly east to west for the radiation pattern, but and so that's where I am with antennas. I've got the G5 RV on order and should be here this week and might get it up next weekend. That's all for me. AE0BQ, back to net.
Oh, very good. We've got the Aero J-pole and the for the VHF and UHF and the G5 RV for the HF. And what made you choose the G5 RV?
Just advice of everybody I talk to. I got a guy I've known for 20 years, and he's in the OMIS group, and I guess he's won awards in OMIS, so he's a big DXer, and he said that's the way to go if you don't have room for a 200-foot tower and a quad Yagi with a rotor. So, and they're cheap, so I'll be able to work all the way down to 160, I think. So based on the advice of several Elmers, AE0BQ, back to net.
Very cool. Yeah, that sounds similar to the DXCC. Well, I mean, I guess it's not exactly like the DXCC, but it kind of has some of the same features of the DXCC for the HF side. It looks like it's a balanced uses a ladder line for its connection to the radio. Is that correct?
Right. The ladder line provides, I think, non-integral segments and reflection to create fractional wavelength resonances. Fancy way of saying the ladder line is part of the antenna, and that's how I'm no PhD in antenna theory, but that's how it gets all the different coverages on all the different bands. AE0BQ, back to net.
Very cool. And how has the Aero J-pole been working? I have a Diamond X50 clone, essentially, that I use. And, how's that Aero J-pole treating you?
Well, I ordered it from Gigaparts, and it arrived bent. about a 10-degree bend in it. No problem. It's just metal rod, so straighten that right out. It's fine. It went together, taped up the coax on it, stuck it at the top of the pole, and away we went. It was fine. I worked with it. The first pole I had on the ground was a 25-footer. I kind of sort of, I just had that stuck on a wooden base, and a couple weeks later I got a 40-foot pole and put it on there. And I can hit, I certainly can receive most of the repeaters in this area from, Wyoming down to the airport, basically. Have trouble opening up the machine at Estes Park and Allens Park and a couple other ones that are far flung out in the mountains. But pretty much everything on the front range up and down the I-25 corridor, I can and of course, Squaw Mountain and the Connection and CRA and all these different ones. I can get all those. So it's done a great job. AE0BQ, back to net.
Yeah, and I can see how it would be a little tough to reach Estes from Longmont there. That's quite the jump up through the mountains for sure. Anybody else have a multiband antenna, HF, VHF, UHF, that they would like to tell us about? Please call. Yeah, Bart, please go ahead.
I currently have 2 of the Arrow dual band J-poles. The one I'm using right this minute is up in the attic, leaned about a 20-degree angle because my attic was not done with antennas in mind. It was done with use as much wood as you possibly can in mind. The second one is on a 20-foot pole in the backyard, and I can get the Cheyenne repeater, no problem. I can get over 50 UHF repeaters in Colorado and Wyoming with it in that current configuration, and I'm very, very pleased with it. It's been a good antenna. My HF, the only multi-band HF antenna I have had is a delta loop that was cut for 40, and it worked well on 40, 15, 20, and 10. It was fed at a bottom corner, and so it was horizontally polarized, and it too used the ladder line into a tuner inside the house. And yes, the ladder line is definitely part of the antenna system with all the appropriate precautions necessary as a result, like grounding the tuner. That worked extremely well. I was very happy with it. You couldn't see it at all. It was up in a tree, and I would recommend that as an ideal starter antenna. It was a lot of fun to put up, and it worked remarkably well. N0NYY, back to net.
This is Whiskey Zero Delta Delta Zulu with the Northern Colorado Amateur Radio Club Technical Net. So the Arrow J-pole that's in your attic, is that for the storm season when you don't want to have the antenna outside plugged in?
You give me more credit than I deserve. It went up in the attic because it was the highest place I could put it when I first got into this house and wanted an antenna and discovered the restrictions of the HOA. So I put it up there, but there's a few repeaters I wanted and I just couldn't quite get. It's probably 10 or 12 feet off the ground, and it worked fine. And then I got annoyed and I wanted another one that would do better, so I got one. I bought another one and I put it up on 2 of the chain link fence top rails right up against the back of the house. The HOA says I can't have anything above the eave. It's definitely above the eave, but it's not easy to see. It's not apparent, and nobody ever looks up. They just don't do it.
That is another good topic point to bring up, that the HOA antennas and getting one in the attic for the HOA as well as for storms. It's nice to have a protected antenna somewhere so that you can continue to talk during storms that are heavy on lightning. How do they compare to each other? How much better do you do off the one outside than the one inside?
I haven't noticed. I haven't really done a comparison per se. This repeater is full scale on both of them. As I said, the one is leaned to the south and east about probably 20 degrees, maybe 15. The one in the attic does not do very well into the Denver repeaters. I can hear them, but they're a little noisy. The one up on the pole, they're all full quieting. So as we go south, my performance improves dramatically. I cannot hit the Cheyenne repeater to the north with this antenna. I mean, I can bring the repeater up, but I can't be heard. But I can talk fairly reliably, not full quieting, but fairly reliably from the elevated outside antenna.
BQ with a comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Daryl.
Right, I'm only pushing 25 watts. I have a little $75 Blue Sky CQYT, whatever it is. And so when I graduate and get a real, I don't know, 65 watt or something, dual band for the bass, I'll probably be able to hit a lot more. Previous respondent, how many watts is your VHF and UHF dual band? AE0BQ back to net.
I believe it's a TYT TH9800, and I don't have the specs in front of me, and I don't remember for sure. I do know that my radio downstairs will do 50 on 2 meters and 40 on UHF.
Just looking up the TYT 9800, it looks like it's 50 watts on VHF and 40 watts on UHF.
About the same as the 706 downstairs. Yep.
How about mobile? I know that's another place that I have a Super Gainer 9800. I think, Bart, you have one of those. How do you like that thing?
So mine is not the 9800. Mine's like a 7500 or something. It's 7 dB on 440 and 5.7 on 2. And I absolutely love that antenna. It is awesome. I have a bunch of the little tram, basically Unity antenna mag mounts, and they work okay. But I'm behind the ridge, what I call the Greeley Ridge, which has 34 on it. I'm behind that down in Evans, and getting into this repeater can be a nuisance with the tram antennas. And just about everywhere I go, I have noticed that 7500. It's a Comet. I believe it's a Comet 7500. And I am absolutely thrilled with that antenna. And yes, there are even stronger ones out there at a slight increase in cost and somewhat of an increase in height. I think this one is 52 or 54 inches high. And if I ran that on my Tahoe, I can get into trouble. But right now I run it on my Kia Soul, and it dramatically outperforms the Larson dual bander that's on the truck.
Yes, you were right about that model number. I got it wrong. It was the 7900 is the one that I was thinking of, which I have on my van. And yes, you are right. You definitely have to pay attention to clearance. Sometimes I find myself kind of watching, looking up, making sure that I don't wreck that antenna for sure.
Yeah, you learn to thread your way between the branches, but it's a necessary evil, or a learned skill. N0NYY back to net.
Yes, you definitely start to get skillful at that after a while of having that antenna. So, Mark, W2MIC, I know you have quite the HF mobile setup. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
W2MIC. Oh, I have many thoughts. Let's see. Multiband HF. So what I run is a Citizens Band radio whip, a 106 inch, 108 inch, and an LDG tuner, and I can tune that whip with the LDG AT200 Pro 2 tuner from 6 meters through 40 meters and everything in between. And that's kind of a cool setup because the LDG tuner is kind of your basic bombshell tuner. It will adjust or match pretty much anything from symmetric antennas like dipoles to asymmetric antennas like Windoms to end-fed wires to long wires. And it does a very decent job with just a whip on top of the vehicle. And of course, the nice part about a whip is the CB whip costs about $25, $30. So when you whack it on a tree and destroy it, you don't cry real hard. For more better multiband capabilities, that same CB whip on top of a Wolf River coil. Wolf, like the animal, runs in packs. River, like water flows through it. Wolf River coils makes wrapped coils with takeoffs. If you know what a bug catcher is, this is kind of a bug catcher, only much more robust. And you can tune a CB whip from 20 through 80 inclusive. The bad news is you have to get out and move the tap up and down the coil. But the little coil's about $40 or $50, and the big coil that'll do through 80 is about $60 or $70. You can buy them in combinations. And the whip is about $25. And that is a way cheaper solution than a whole collection of ham sticks at 6, 10, 12, 15, 17, 20, 30, 40, 80, and about $30 a piece. So I think the Wolf River coil is a much better way to go. Certainly as robust and easy to replace parts if they get broken.
And how does your SWR come across the bands? Is that pretty easy for any tuner to tune, or is your 11 to 1 LDG automatic tuner pretty necessary for that setup?
Most radios that have a built-in tuner have a tuner that will handle at most an SWR of 3 to 1, and they assume that you have a symmetric antenna, like a half-wave dipole. The LDG tuners, the high-end ones, will tune asymmetric antennas, and the CB whip is definitely an asymmetric antenna because the driven element is the CB whip, and the passive element is the vehicle metal body. So yeah, you need a tuner that will drive an asymmetric antenna. In your case, Dave, I think you're using a ICOM AT180, which will only tune an SWR of 3, worst case, and it has to be symmetric. ICOM does make an antenna for just this purpose called the AH4, Alpha Hotel 4, that is designed to be mounted just inside the trunk with the antenna on the trunk, or is designed to be mounted in the bed of a pickup truck with a whip on the edge of the pickup truck, or to be mounted on top of a vehicle. And they work extremely well. But yeah, you need a tuner that's explicitly designed for asymmetric use, meaning a whip and then a vehicle body as the counterpoise. Oh, and I'll note that with the Wind River coil and a CB whip, you do not, repeat, not need a tuner.
Well, and another thing that you've showed me on your Wolf River coil is the multiple clamps that you have on it, so you can easily switch between bands. You want to talk a little bit about that?
W2MIC. Sure. The original Wolf River coils are a piece of PVC pipe with a threaded groove and a piece of stainless steel wire wrapped in a spiral fashion such that the adjacent wraps don't touch. The original version of the antenna had a little piece of PVC with a spring clip that you could slide up and down the coil to short out the bottom portion of the coil, and a single wire going down to the base of the coil. Again, if you know what a bug catcher is, or a Texas bug catcher, this is the same general idea. That meant that every time you wanted to change bands, you had to get out of the car and hop up on top and move the tap. Recently, Wolf River Coils has come up with a multi-tap system where you can put 2, or if you wish, more taps on the coil in fixed locations. And then they used an Anderson power pole quick disconnect connector, electrical connector, so that you can just get out and move the wire from tap number 1 to tap number 2 to tap number 3. And that's way faster than sliding the tap up and down and counting how many coils you have moved. So I have the 2-tap system on my Wolf River coil right now, and I'm getting ready to adapt a 3rd coil with a power pole connector. And that's just way more convenient, way faster. In real life, you operate on 20 and 40 almost all the time. So if you could somehow have a 2-band mobile HF antenna for 20 and 40, that would cover almost all your usage. Well, the Wolf River coil with the 2-tap connectors, a pair of connectors, lets you set up for 20 or 40, and then you have to get out and move the wire once or twice. Basically, you're running 20 during the day and 40 during the night, so that's like once in the morning and once in the evening. Not too inconvenient. So, Dave, shall I continue on to the Wolf River coil and the MFJ 1979 17-foot telescopic antenna for your home base HOA-compliant HF antenna?
Oh, yes, please.
Second that, yes, please, N0NYY.
W2MIC. On YouTube, Wolf River Coils has a very good channel demonstrating their assorted products. The coils they have a standard 3/8-inch stud, which is what is on the bottom of a CB whip, and MFJ makes a wonderful telescoping antenna, meaning a telescopic whip, not a solid whip, that extends up to 17 feet, 17. Well, 17 feet, for those of you who pay attention to such things, is a quarter-wave antenna on 20 meters. And the telescoping nature of the antenna allows you to adjust its length. MFJ supplies you with suggested lengths, and you will need a tape measure. And it would be good to have an antenna analyzer, but if your radio has an SWR meter, you're all set. And that antenna you can literally tune, meaning adjust its length, to be resonant on 6 through 20 inclusive. Price is about $60 plus shipping. HRO has them in stock. They're available on Amazon. DX Engineering has them. Everybody has them. The great part is when it's telescoped down, it's small enough to fit in a day pack. Telescoped up, it goes anywhere from 6 to 20, and then you stick it on top of a Wolf River coil, and it will do 40 and 80, and I am getting some reports saying 160. I'm still playing with that. You need to hold it up somehow, and you can clamp it to a fence or clamp it to a fence post or whatever you want. And you need to put out some counterpoise wires. These are just pieces of wires. And what the manufacturer of the Wolf River coils tells me is that 3 33-foot long counterpoises will work for you all through 20 and up. And then you may need some more counterpoises for 40, 80, whatever you're doing. Again, just any old piece of wire. Doesn't have to be anything special, doesn't have to be strong. And that is by far and away the least expensive HF vertical. And oh, by the way, you can use the coil on your vehicle, And, oh, by the way, you can carry the coil and the telescoping antenna in your backpack if you like climbing up mountains. And let's see, what have I forgotten? Works great. I'm still learning to play with it, but all of those things I was saying about the multiple taps apply. So if you want to set up and tune for different things, you can. Let's see, $60 for the telescoping whip, 40 or 60-ish for the coil, some way to hold it up, a photographic tripod, audio speaker tripod, a piece of fence. I know people who've literally just clamped them to a chicken wire fence. Get you up and going, good low-level takeoff, super inexpensive, takes about 20 seconds to erect. Sorry about that, and unroll your radials, and up you go. And when the nasty old HOA inspector might be coming around, you just fold the thing down and it's all gone.
Yes, you have showed me that antenna, and what's really cool about it is, yes, it telescopes down to about the same size as the Wolf River coil is, and will slide into the backpack along with that Wolf River coil and do some backwoods HF action. Very cool antenna setup. Do you have a model number on that MFJ telescoping antenna?
1979, 1979er.
Very cool. Any questions for Mark? I know he went over quite a bit of his very cool multiband antennas.
N0BNK.
Good evening, Rick. Go ahead.
Mark, you forgot to talk about putting that in an INVIS configuration.
Ooh, thank you, Rick. And Rick has a Wolf River coil and the appropriate telescoping antennas, I believe. Yes, one of the really, really cool things about the Wolf River coil is you can mount it vertically, which I do, or it's plenty strong, and the MFJ telescoping whip is plenty strong. You can mount it horizontally and I mounted mine at about 8 or 9 feet up, and that in turn gives you a, let's see, NVIS, near vertical incidence skywave, I think. And that means that your HF signal goes up and bounces off the ionosphere and comes back down pretty much straight rather than skipping off to Japan. And this gives you the ability to talk on HF locally, like within the state of Colorado. Super convenient. You can also, kind of changing the subject, you can get 2 coils and 2 telescopic whips, and you can make yourself a dipole, and that in turn has some directionality. So you can then have a multi-band dipole. You have to tune the taps and change the lengths of the whips, but that will give you a dipole, and if, like me, you have a 26-foot painter's pole, you can stick that up in the air, and you can have a little bit of directionality and some awfully good signal.
Oh, that's very interesting. I would have never thought to put it horizontally to get into a NVIS antenna style situation. And the way that NVIS was kind of described to me is it's basically like taking a Yagi and pointing it straight up. Does that sound about right?
Right. Yep, very reasonable explanation. The ground acts as a reflector, a poor one, but it does. And by sending your signal straight up, rather than more or less out horizontally, you go up and you bounce and you come back down. The problem with most HF antennas is they have a low takeoff angle. So as Joe was mentioning, TYU was mentioning earlier about his cobweb or spiderweb or whatever it is, that has a low takeoff angle, so he can't talk to Colorado. He can only talk to more distant places. The NVIS antenna, I think, is a must-have for emergency use, because if things go bleep in the night, you want to be able to talk to Colorado VHF, UHF is great for line of sight and repeaters, but if you want to talk to somebody up in the mountains and they're behind a ridge, you can't get to them. Well, you can with NVIS.
Yes, and that's one big advantage to some of the HF that we get to do, and one of the advantages to amateur radio is frequency agility and being able to use various frequencies in various ways to get to the people that you want to talk to. NVIS is definitely a great option for that. I've seen it done with a lower dipole kind of in the correct configuration to shoot a signal straight up. I know. Bart, do you still have your NVIS set up?
I still have it. It's on the picnic table in the backyard. It's not erected at the moment because I needed to mow the grass. That is a single band, and it is basically a 40-meter dipole. Mine is made with steel electric fence wire, because a 250-foot roll of that is $8. And basically it consists of the dipole 7 feet off the ground. Mine is suspended in the center with PVC pipe and at both ends with PVC pipe. Underneath it are 3 reflectors, which are about 10%, maybe a little less, longer, 8% longer than the dipole. One is centered under the dipole, and there is one 6 feet to either side. All 3 are parallel. What that does is it enhances and makes or stabilizes the ground reflectivity. When Randy was over in Utah, he and I talked on that antenna pretty much every day until about 4:30 in the afternoon. It was reliable as can be. I also spoke with numerous stations in Nebraska, Colorado Springs, Albuquerque, several other guys in Utah, and it got farther too. It got me as far as the East Coast, but most of my signals were in a lot closer, Colorado and surrounding states, and zeroing my way.
Yeah, and I know with my antenna's current configuration, I get out at about 1,000 miles is where I start hearing stuff. Much closer than that, it's rare for me to hear anybody closer than about 1,000 miles out. Let's see, Rick. I know you like to build a lot of the antennas. Tonight we're talking about multiband antennas. Do you have any interesting things for us tonight?
Well, I have, a lot of you have already heard of this antenna. I'm using an enclosed trailer, a metal trailer, 6 foot square, about 10 foot long. It has some antenna mast on either side of it going up for 6 meters, VHF, UHF. Those are isolated from the ground right now, and that trailer is resonant at 40 meters, and with the help of a LDG IT100 tuner, it'll do 40 through 10. It doesn't like 6 meters, but I change back and forth between it and a 40-meter dipole, just checking signals, and it definitely works better for 20 meters than the 40-meter wire one does. So that's my weird antenna. Also, this is a monobander, but I've been making Moxon antennas, just all kinds of them, mostly for VHF. I've got one sitting here right now that is in the works, It's been tested. It is SWR in it is about 1.15 to 1. Stacked. There's 3 of them stacked vertically on a pole, and I'm going to wreck that out here as soon as I get it all waterproofed up and beefed up a little bit. So that's kind of what I've been doing here lately. N0BNK.
Well, I guess the standing question would be, what made you decide to tune up the trailer and see if that would get out?
One day, Randy and I were talking about things, and I told him, you know, if I get up in the camping, you know, or whatever sometime, I'd like to find a barbed wire fence that had wooden poles on it that were, you know, that were not grounded, and try that for an antenna. So he told me about a guardrail that they used one time, and got me to thinking, hey, I've got a trailer sitting out here. I'm going to try that. So I did, and it works. It's not the best, but it does work. So HOA people, if you've got a RV sitting out in your yard or a big box trailer or something, go out there and load it up. You just hook the center conductor to the skin and pound a little ground wire in the ground, and you're off.
Yeah, I've definitely heard of people tuning up their gutters and other various things. I gotta admit, you're the first one I've heard of tuning up a trailer. That's for sure.
Sure.
I get a kick out of the response of people when I tell them what I'm using for an antenna. They kind of do a double take.
Oh, I imagine that for sure. Anybody else want to tell us about their multiband antenna or creative ideas for multiband antennas? Please call. Sounded like there may have been a weak station in there. Do you want to try one more time?
Perb tri-band handheld antenna for 2 meters, 1.25 meters, or 220 megahertz, and UHF, or 440. I'm using one right now at half a watt from North Loveland, and it is just a gorgeous antenna. I've used it on my dual band Yaesu FT60 with equally good results. And on tri-band radios, be they Baofengs or Taiteras, or in my case a Kenwood, it is just an absolutely superb antenna.
Oh, I doubled with you at the beginning of that. Do you wanna just go one more time, Mark?
Sure. I was suggesting the Diamond SRH320A, Sierra Romeo Hotel 320 Alpha. It is a tri-band 2 meter, 1.25 meter, 70 centimeter antenna. It's a handheld antenna. It's not an HF antenna, and it works just superbly.
Did you get one of those for the your new 74?
Yes, indeed, and Radio Dan's trying to get in there.
W7RF, go ahead.
I was just checking in for the antenna stuff. I had quite a few suggestions for antennas, but I will wait my turn. And hello, Mark. Hello, Dave. W7RF, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dan. We're interested in what you have to say.
Well, make sure before I get too far into it, I think the thread was, what do we have for interesting antennas, multi-band, unique antennas? I guess this applies to low bands as well.
Oh, yes. We are looking at all multi-band antennas, including dual-band, tri-band, dipoles versus colinear, inverted Vs versus Windoms, HOA antennas, mobile HF, VHF, and UHF.
And satellite.
Okay. Well, I've got quite a few suggestions on the homebrew HF department. That's something I really enjoy a lot. One cool way to do things would be to go ahead and take your longest antenna band for a vertical, for example, and use that as the support for hanging wires off the side of it. I'm looking at one particular example. I have a 40-meter full quarter wavelength vertical, 33 feet tall. It's elevated feed, so the feed is approximately, about 7 or 8 feet off the ground. Radials start at about 6 or so feet off the ground, and I have 8 of them for 40 meters. I have them cut slightly different, but what I've done also is I put a 30-meter wire, 23 feet long, stood off from the vertical itself at about 12 inches. It's, hang on. There we go. So what I've done is I've made a 40 and 30-meter vertical, full size, using the main 40-meter antenna as the support. Now you can expand that out too. You can add more wires to it. There's actually a pretty unique design that, if you think about it, you could actually use PVC pipe, as long as it's supported, and run a wire up the center section of it, let's just say 20 feet. And then you can go ahead and run that wire out as an inverted L for whatever band you want to be the longest, let's say 40 meters. So 20 feet of PVC pipe as an example, and run the wire up the center of it, and out for the rest of the approximate 13 feet as an inverted L for 40 meters. And then you can go ahead and hang other wires off with PVC T's at various locations up the vertical, and that would give you all the rest. Oops, sorry about that. That would give you all the rest of the bands that you wanted, basically for making your own homebrew, full-size vertical antenna. It does require radials for the other part of the antenna, but don't be afraid of that. It'll be very efficient, and you will not have put $689 in MFJ's pocket. Go ahead.
Oh, I know that's definitely an advantage, being able to make our own and do it cheaply. I know you also have your giant loop. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, my loop antenna is a little more difficult to repeat for the average ham, but the concept is the same. What I have is 1,100 feet of wire in a loop, out in a perfect square in my back field. The telephone poles are spaced 280 feet apart, and it's up about 65 feet. It's fed in one corner with a ladder line, open wire line, whatever you wish to use. That 450 ohm window line is fine, although the part that goes up to the feed point does take a beating in the wind. So what you can do for a loop antenna is take any amount of wire you have and have as open of an inside angle as possible. Like, for example, the worst thing to do would be, say you had 100 feet of wire. You wouldn't want to run it 40 feet, 10 feet, 40 feet, and 10 feet. That would be a very narrow rectangle. You'd like to open that up as much as possible. And if you can get it, say, my radio timed out, so it's telling me to go ahead and reset. So what you'd do is you'd go ahead and open up the inside angles as much as you could. It does not have to be a perfect shape of any sort. It can be skewed. But if you feed it in one corner, or anywhere along the line, to be honest with you, would open wire line and then tune it back at your station with a true balanced tuner, or you could use an L or a T-type tuner with a ballon in the end of it. That would give you multi-band operation anywhere you want to go, and it's very efficient and very cheap. It's just a matter of poles holding things up. Before I put up my big loop, I had an approximately 450 feet of wire, and all I had was two poles stacked on top of each other at each location to go ahead and make this into an odd-shaped, whatever you want to call it, square, rectangle, whatever. But it was only 20 feet off the ground, and it worked marvelously, and also next to free. W7RF. Go ahead, Dave.
This is Whiskey Zero Delta Delta Zulu with the Northern Colorado Amateur Radio Club Monday TechNet. Yes, Dan's loop is quite impressive. How many poles do you have that on now?
It's 4 poles. They're 70-foot utility poles, and the wire's at about 65 feet, and they're spaced 280 feet apart in a square.
Yeah, and it really is quite impressive to see, and you've worked pretty much the whole world with that thing, haven't you?
Oh, yeah, I can use it on any band I want. I generally use it on 160, 80, 40, and 30 meters, although I've got duplicate antennas for those bands too. But it's amazing how well it works. I mean, if you guys remember the FT5 Zulu mic in Amsterdam Island, basically it's almost the antipode, almost to the opposite side of the world from where we are here in Fort Collins. I worked them on 160 meters in the morning, and they had between 15 and 22 minutes of time where I was able to hear them. And most days they were 4 S units out of the noise for a 13,000-mile path on 160. So it's an incredible antenna. What the saying is about big loops like this is that once you put them up, you never take them down because there's nothing else to replace them with.
Oh yeah, I imagine that. It would seem like it'd be pretty hard to get any better than that. Any questions for Dan while we have him here? He's definitely got some tricks up his sleeve in his very long amateur radio career. Hearing none, we've also talked about the AH4 tuner by ICOM, and I know I'm pretty sure, Dan, you use that in a mobile configuration. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I love the AH4. Whether you use it with ICOM radios or not, if you don't use them with ICOM radios, you have to build a small circuit that basically tells the antenna tuner to start tuning, because it's not a sense the RF start tuning type of a tuner. If you use it with ICOM radios, it's just a beautiful breeze. Anything from the low-priced ICOM 718 to their flagship radios have got a 4-pin connector on the back for this purpose. And the AH4, basically, it feeds a random wire antenna, whether it be in a vertical configuration, a long wire, or part of both, like an inverted L. If you use it as a long wire, you will need at least one wire as a counterpoise. If you use it as an inverted L, basically a vertical, numerous radials would really be great. And the nice part about using this in a configuration as an inverted L is then you have both the combination of low-angle radiation from the vertical portion and high-angle. Let me get my preset again. And high-angle radiation from the horizontal part. So this can be an antenna that works both DX, long distances, and stuff within the typical 1,000-mile radius type of thing. So the nice part about it is there is no fooling around, no band switching. On the ICOM radio, you just touch the mic button and it goes clickety-clack, and all of a sudden you are tuned and ready to go everywhere from 160 through 6 meters, as long as you've got enough wire on there, of course. But typically, if you've got 25, 30 feet of wire or more, you can tune 80 meters. Of course, the longer the better when it comes to 80 meters. Nevertheless, this is a fantastic antenna. You can use it for HOA situations. Let me reset. You can use it for HOA situations where, let's just say you were to bolt this to a wooden fence on the inside of your fence, and you have 15 feet, 20 feet of aluminum tubing on a pivot. And the rest of that aluminum tubing, you got a piece of wire coming off the end of that. Maybe you could tie it off to a tree or to another pole or something like that. And while the HOA Nazis are out checking for violations, you have it folded down. When you want to get on the air, you fold it up, you put the pin in there to lock your pivot, and you're on the air instantly, and no band changing problems. So there's a lot of possibilities with an AH4. Now, I use one also in my truck. I have a Toyota Tundra, and I use that with a 102-inch whip on 20 meters and up, and I have individual coils for 40 meters, 30 meters, and 80 meters that I use when I want to get on those bands with more efficiency. So the AH4, and it has to be very, very close to the actual, it has to be very, very close to the feed point of the antenna, because obviously all of the antenna tuning is done right there at the feed point. The nice part about that is the coax always carries 50 ohm information, so there's no additional loss in the coax from high SWR for antenna bands that are not resonant, because the antenna wire or mobile situation would be all random anyway, and it would be tuning it as necessary. W0DDZ in the net, W7 Radio Fox.
We appreciate it, Dan. Yeah, I've always enjoyed you sharing your toys with me. They're very cool. Definitely makes my brain start cooking on ideas that I can do. And yeah, that AH4, I have heard nothing but good things about it. I don't have one myself yet, but I definitely hear nothing but good things about it. Any questions about any of the AH4 or the loops or any of the multi-band antenna stuff that we've talked about with Dan or anybody else, please call.
KD02YU.
Hey, Joe, go ahead.
I just thought I'd mention, and I'm sure that Dan and Mark will actually say this, that a lot of people think that and I think Mark actually stated this, a lot of people think that the radio tuners that are built in will handle just about anything that you got, and that's not necessarily true. The LDGs and some of the other ones, like the Icons and things like that, they'll handle a lot more, and if you get yourself into trouble, you got to really kind of know that, because if you had, I've got, the 1200 has got its own tuner, but no, it ain't going to work for this. This other deal I got out here with the 80 meter one. So just make sure that when you look into an antenna system and things like that, for that, you kind of know what you're dealing with as far as SWRs. Multiband antennas really have some of them have issues with one band being good and the other one. So you really need a good quality tuner.
Yeah, you definitely need at least a good quality tuner to characterize your antenna system so that you know where your operating range is. I know the tuner I'm using only does 3-to-1 SWR, and so I only have various operating ranges in each of the bands. And like I said earlier, 80 is probably my narrowest, where I have to be very careful of where I am on that band and only transmit inside of the 3-to-1 operating range. Anybody have any other multiband antennas that they'd like to tell us about? Please call.
Yeah, if I might expand on Joe's comment.
Oh, yes, please. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, Joe is absolutely right about that. And there's another thing that's very important with the antenna tuners that are built into radios or antenna tuners that are inside your shack that you feed your antennas with coax. That's the key. If you do feed an antenna with coax and your antenna tuner is inside the shack, then whatever the SWR is that needs to be tuned out to bring it to a 1-to-1 or as close as possible to that needs to go ahead and also travel along the transmission line from the tuner to the antenna. So if your antenna, for example, is resonant on certain bands, yet the bandwidth is not wide enough. Let's just say, for example, like Dave's, he's got a dipole that's shortened. It's 82 feet, but that's obviously too short for 80 meters. Well, he can extend the range, the usable range of that antenna by an antenna tuner in his shack. Now, tuning out a 3 or 4 to... Let me just reset there. With tuning out a SWR of 3 or 4 or 5 to 1 at the lower frequencies is no big deal. There will be a tiny amount of additional feed line loss due to SWR over what the rating for the coax is at that frequency and length. But it's not significant if you're actually just trying to go ahead and tune out small extra SWR on an antenna that's already resonant there. If you're trying to take an antenna with a 10 or a 20 to 1 SWR and make it actually forced to work on the band that you want that it's not even supposed to be close to, then you're going to have a huge amount of loss along the feed line, even though your antenna tuner may be able to find a match. Therefore, the efficiency and the usefulness of the antenna on that frequency or that band is going to be very, very limited. W0DDZ, W7RF.
Yeah, that is one of the big advantages to the AH4 is that it is actually right there at the antenna, so it is that definitely helps with the efficiency, and you don't have the loss from the feed line. That is a huge advantage to that thing, and I guess that's why they're so well liked in both home and mobile applications. Does anybody else have any comments about multiband antennas or questions about anything we've gone over? Please call. Does anybody have any general questions while we have such knowledgeable people on the net? Please give a call. Hearing none, I will thank everybody for participating tonight. You guys are always have a plethora of information for us. It's always great to participate in these tech nets because I always learn so much. And I have my notes all here of stuff to go over and research more. It adds to my list of wants. It looks like next week, when Kevin is back, I am filling in for Kevin today because he is out of town. Next week when Kevin is back, it looks like our topic is Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and their uses inside of amateur radio, which is definitely some very cool uses that they have inside of amateur radio. Any questions for anybody before we close the net for the night? Hearing none, this is Whiskey Zero Delta Delta Zulu with the Northern Colorado Amateur Radio Club TechNet. Tonight we talked about multi-band antennas, dual band, tri-band, dipole versus colinear, inverted versus Windom HOA antennas, mobile HF, VHF, and UHF. We thank everybody for participating, and definitely to all of the net Elmers that have helped us and talked to us about the many options that we have. This is Whiskey Zero Delta Delta Zulu, and the repeater is now open for general use. Thank you all. This presentation was brought to you by the Northern Colorado Amateur Radio Club. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.